brother. Welcome back into the Rose Garden. It's been a day of technical issues, hasn't it?
It has been like, hey, all 612 day, right? First of all, let me give a shout out to all my 612 brethren and sisters. But yeah, oh, yes. Hey, but it looks like it's all functional now.
It does. It does. My goodness, it's been an interesting experience for us today. So, if for those who don't know us, I'm Syretta. I'm the better half of the sibling pair, I think. And up until a few weeks ago, or no, actually, it's been over a month now. We were Irish twins, and I'm joined by my exceptionally gifted and talented brother, Xadean Amasi. Boy, it's been quite a week, and I see that you have become dressed and prepared for the occasion because you got a new hat. Tell us about it.
The hat comes from when I thought I lost the one that my little princess gave me, that was a special gift because it was the last gift she gave me. So, I felt compelled to order some more, but then I found the one I lost. You know what I mean? And that fun I found that one I lost, but I was so happy I found it because ain't nothing like the original. Feel me?
Goodness, yeah, and it's certainly a great representation of what little things mean to us when our families give them to us. We're coming up on also a very special holiday, which is Father's Day. So let me be the first to tell you Happy Father's Day.
Thank you. I appreciate this.
Yeah, so for all the dads and the stepdads and the people who are acting as fathers figures, such a wonderful opportunity to kind of hang out and get to know who you are and be celebrated for who you are. My husband always has a issue with Father's Day because he's like, I'm a good father all year round. So don't I deserve to be celebrated? And he does. And so, but we tried to make Father's Day such a wonderful thing to him. Although I've noticed that on Father's Day, my husband does a lot more work than he needs to. He's usually the one on the grill, the one cooking. So I don't know if that's going to be your experience, but that's going to be his. I know he's going to be firing up the grill for us on Sunday.
But I ain't really trying to I don't know how it's gonna unfold. Like every day to me is spontaneous, it's to be whatever I feel in my heart to do on that day. But I might fire up the grill, but I'm really close to my goal. So I'm thinking I probably won't do that. You feel me? Because it probably will mess up my goal and extend it out like another week. But I think I'm like a week and a few days away from hitting my goal.
But folks don't know what your goal is. Don't be keeping it secret for us. So tell us what.
They'll find out once I achieve it. The goal is for me
So the
personally.
That's true. So you're gonna keep us waiting about your goal. Well, we got a lot of exciting things coming in the end of June for the Rose Garden in our podcast. I'm so exceptionally happy to do it. For those who don't know, we would have been here sitting here doing this anyway, but we use this time to talk about current events, to connect and build each other up, and to create community that's safe for all of us. And I hope you find that that is what this experience is too. We are behind today because we normally launch the Rose Garden at 2 o'clock, but we had some challenges this today about with the technology, and we wanted to make sure that we gave you the full Rose Garden experience. So it seems like we're up and running. I see us live again, and I think we have some folks who joined us. So I'm very happy to be here with you. And I don't know about you, brother, but I have been watching vigorously the events that have been happening in California, and it has really shaped for me how I'm situating myself in this experience. And I'm curious to hear what you're doing to keep yourself grounded and safe and moving forward.
It's had me in some deep reflection on these the narrative warfare, right? These stories that we adopt, that people are trying to impose on us. And then, you know, basically it has me expanding my awareness on, what the bigger picture is, right?
Right.
And one of these things is me asking myself a question if I really want to continue to proliferate the ideology that's imposed on us by other people, you know,
Right.
like the differences between us in race and all this stuff. But I caught like some chatter, about people of other racial backgrounds looking at what's going on with the the what I consider the apprehensions and on the Hispanic population right now, right?
Mhm.
And it's crazy because some people have this idea like it's not our fight, right? Yeah, but like Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, right? I think by, we just sitting by and watching things happen to other people by virtue of doing that, you condone it. And I think, when these people are done, you know, dealing with what they consider to be a migrant problem, I wonder what's the next problem they're going to tackle in this kind of a way.
And I think you bring up a interesting point when we have created this kind of us versus them construct, and that really, again, it's the propaganda narrative. If you can separate human experiences from your own, you don't think about it as much. And I'm recognizing that I'm hearing a lot of even my own conversations within my groups about, we can't be, we're tired. We being the proverbial Black people are tired because we were marching down the street yelling and being a part of some very oppressive conditions, and we thought that others were sitting out. And I think the kind of interesting perspective about that is that it can happen to any of us and all of us. And from a human perspective, watching the harms that are occurring now really is really, really painful. I know one thing that I'm doing to make sure that I'm remaining healthy in this is understanding and defining what is resistance. And so I'm not sure if you kind of define that for yourself, but I know for me, one area of resistance is being able to vocalize and have conversations with people and challenge people who are openly ignoring and believing propaganda. So, what are some things that you're resisting in as well?
I'm definitely right now at this stage. It's just, I feel like it's kind of we late to the game in terms of action to be able to do anything, right?
Mm.
Ultimately, I feel like in terms of a apparatus as a whole with the group of people that I'm associated with, we have no means to enforce any idea. So it's funny because, when I was looking at the uh the dissension that's happening within the governmental branches, right, that confront our country, the executive branch and the legislative and the judicial branches are basically in my view in contention with each other, right? But the thing that I heard coming out of the executive branch, which I thought was really interesting, was they were like, well, if these other branches don't like it, enforce it, you know? And I
Mhm.
really, well, they right. Because what does the legislative branch have in terms of an arm to enforce anything? Like they don't have anything, no military, nothing like that. The judicial branch, the Department of Justice is under them, so they actually do have like law enforcement and stuff like that under them that they supposedly are able to enforce stuff, but they really can't because the executive branch is the commander in chief over the actual military. So they can do things like call it the National Guard, which has been done, and override, like the natural law enforcement, right? So,
But I just to cut you off for a second, I do think resistance is somewhat a little bit more personal than that. From a perspective of refusing to accept or comply with actions, experiences that are being imposed on us. I think resistance can be more nuanced than breaking down systemic structures like you're describing. And I think that that's what people really need to kind of be in this experience now. So one of those acts of resistance is actually not ignoring it, because you and I have had conversations, during the week where we're noticing people ignore those harms that and that part of that ignoring process is what kind of got us here, right? The rhetoric around immigrants and what they did or didn't contribute to our country now has allowed the situation and experience that we're seeing now, where the government that has been put in place is put in place, but two, they're being very hostile to people who actually were real big contributors to our society. So again, I want to remove this idea that we can't as individuals be very, very much a part of some kind of resistance. And resistance can just be that little basic piece of annoyance or defiance that gives you peace in these big, big structural systems. So again, I challenge people. I don't ignore it anymore. I'm reminding myself when we're having conversations that I need to sometimes introduce experiences to people who don't haven't traditionally had those experiences. I read somewhere recently that a large swath of white Americans do not have any interaction with Black or brown people on an everyday basis. Now, that's very different for Black people, right? Yes, I would argue on an everyday basis, there's very few opportunities where I'm not interacting with somebody that doesn't look like me. But for people that are white, that is something that's eye-opening to me, that they may not have interactions or experiences. So the only way they're exposed to those experiences is through rhetoric, propaganda, and maybe contemporary music. So we can change that. That's something that's, to me, an act of resistance so that people can see me. And again, asking people to see me means that they, is trying to create this narrative around being more human. I'm also very sensitive to what this experience is doing to children. And when I can, I work to really inoculate them from that experience. And so I don't want you to think resistance has to be this big, dramatic. Our boycotts is resistance. Our meaningfully selecting institutions and businesses that promote our well-being is resistance, especially in a system that's so oppressive right now.
So you talking to me about that in terms of resistance, or you just talking in general? Because I feel like this, right? Like in terms of the way I'm thinking about resistance, I don't even embrace this racial divide. So, it's strange to me when I hear people say like white people, black people, brown people, and stuff like this. Like, and I want to be careful with the way I'm expressing this because it's not like um, I fully embrace what's the so-called Black experience in America and all this stuff, and I fully understand and acknowledge that there's a very big racial issue in this country specifically, right?
Mhm.
But what I'm trying to say is that there is no such thing as white people and black people and brown people. There's no such thing. So in my own mind, when you talk about resistance, I reject that you know, first and foremost, right? And then I look at it again, like I said, if there's an injustice anywhere, it's a threat to justice everywhere, like Martin Luther King stated. So I feel like, if I walk down the street and I saw somebody getting beat, if I just walk past, by virtue of not doing nothing, I'm condoning it. So
Right,
it's like, what am I going to do specifically about it? So yeah, definitely personally, you know, my heart is always in the fight of doing what's right. Always being on the side of yeah, but also I'll be wondering what's the big larger picture in all of this, right?
right,
Because they have a an aggressive goal of 3,000 plus apprehensions a day. That's a lot of people, and I'm thinking even if they were to be moving those folks outside of the country daily on flights or whatnot, I mean, there's only what, 250, 300 people per flight. If you're doing 3,000 plus a day, that has to be 10 plus flights alone at a minimum, for those things, for these deportations. And then not to mention trying to house 3,000 plus people in like detention centers while they're waiting for the flights to be deported and all whatever way they get deported out of here, right? So it's to me again just watching these, quote unquote apprehensions, which some people are calling abductions and all this stuff, you just wonder once that agenda shifts and changes, because right now it's on the migrant brown folks, right? What's next?
right. It sounds like there needs to be a warning because it doesn't seem like there's any stop to this. But I think you're absolutely right. Like the terrorism that is creating and causing for all of us, I think maybe needs that dramatic shift like you're doing, which is I like that you called your point of resistance is in my mind. I try not to separate the races, which is really a beautiful thing. You got that somewhat for grandma because and that which is great because the space is created for her because I do remember her. Now she didn't say this in such an eloquent way, right? So she wasn't kind of like you, and her bringing introduction to this to me more was like, you know what, I hate all people. And she said blacks, whites, and I deal with everyone individually because she said as a group people are very, very flawed, and groups of people are very, very flawed. And there's things about each race of people that I don't like, and that Rose believes that she is at the time better than, or and doesn't even need to be among. And so again, in her very unsophisticated way, she was also breaking down and not accepting the fact that race is what divides us. It is these human characteristics that she chooses not to kind of associate with if they're negative, and that when she finds individuals that represent her values and beliefs, she sticks with those individuals. And this brings me to an interesting transition, because I'm watching as my older offspring and people are moving into dating arenas, and you can respect this a little bit, because we both are parents of young adults, children.
Mhm.
Well, they're not children anymore, I guess, young adults.
Right.
And they've made some choices about who they've decided to love and to be with. And one of some of those choices are not in alignment with what I would say we've given them as belief sets. And so one of the things that's happened, I think you share this experience, is that there's been this huge divide or separation between, so we haven't been introduced to some of the partners' families. And I'm wondering why that is, why that our children have chosen that separation, not to introduce us. And name a lot of those, that separation comes from they're in interracial situations. And so a part of how we believe, or at least I'm interpreting that distance, is there must be some embarrassment about their Black heritage that they're not willing to share with the people, the partners they choose. So having to deal with that has been an interesting experience from an adult parent perspective.
Well, that's some conjecture on like what's the reasoning that they're acting in the way that they are, right? Because I think that there's plenty of children that are interracial that don't have what we're experiencing within our family. But then also, when we talk about there's a microcosm inside of a macrocosm, right? So a microcosm is family when we're talking about a nation, or a big community as a whole, right? And within our own families, there's lots of dissension. There's not unity of solidarity and whatnot. So then you wonder, well, because I'm very proud to be who I am and from where I've come from. That's why I say I salute 612 for the day or whatever, because that's part of my background, part of my heritage. And every part of my heritage I'm very proud of. But we actually were born into like right in the middle of when the pinnacle of like the drug era was, right?
Yes.
And it's interesting to me because in the larger picture, we're targeted in a select communities, right? Because it was the communities where, they didn't really care too much about and they get isolated from the quote unquote elite. You know what I mean? But then, I just think about all of our historical iconic figures in the culture that came from that time frame, right? That inspired the music, the dress, and all the speak and all of this stuff. There will never be that time again because the reason why they had that kind of access was because of the government focusing and targeting. So what I'm trying to say is by force, yeah, there could be a large apparatus that could act on a community of people. It's just like, when these folks colonized the United States, right? There was indigenous people that lived here that now all of a sudden we forget about. They're wiped out of the history and all this stuff. But there was people that was populating this land already and every other land across the world, right? Now, all of a sudden, we say that the United States was discovered, right? Now it's discovered, now it's colonized. And now what happens to the people that was previously here? Well, they're eradicated, they're removed, and that's what do they call that? That's genocide and ethnic cleansing and stuff like that. But that's okay now because the place that grew out of that devastation is now supposed to be the first place in the world. Like America is best, America is elite, and all this stuff. So again, it's the narrative warfare.
Right.
But I look at that era that we grew up in, which I consider it like the drug era. It was a very dangerous time for real.
Right.
But in that era, although we had access to all kinds of drugs that are imported in here, which one would question, right? How do people with low economic power, have
Right, right.
that kind of, thing. And then, we had access to firearms and weapons, but not real ones, not serious ones. We got hand cannons and shotguns and rifles and automatic weapons and stuff, but not real ones, right? Now, when I say not real ones, we don't have tanks, we don't got tactical helicopters, we don't got fighter jets, we don't got missiles, we don't got
But we don't have the apparatuses to destroy communities. Is what you're saying.
we don't have the
War.
we don't have a means of enforcing ideas or agendas or objectives as a community. And
Okay.
then so I look at that and I say, well, when we have these breakdowns in our own families, right?
Yes.
And we would speculate by saying what we think it is, right? Because those things happen from certain individuals. So the only way we would know is if we spoke to them directly and asked them, what is the problem?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What is your problem?
Well, what makes us not speak to them directly? What do you think? Besides the fact that there's this new culture where, and I think this is a very dangerous culture that's really popping up online, where I think young people are being encouraged to separate from their family of origin, and I'm not talking about family of origins who have been harmful or abusive or neglectful or violent. I'm talking about ideological problems. And again, these young people who are being raised in a context of they're supposed to be given everything that they want. Oh my goodness, my son had just said this word to me that we weren't gentle parents. He wasn't raised in the era of gentle parenting. So that's what these young people are listening to, and they're almost being encouraged in some way very harmfully by people who I think propagate being mental health professionals to separate from their families of origin because they're being harmed, because they're not, in my view, and again, not for the people who have had real harmful situations, abusive, but if you are in a situation where your parents have rules, I can give it, at our house, we have rules. And even, I don't care if you're an adult, if you're living here, we have rules. So you can't come to my house for 5 o'clock in the morning. That's just not
Right,
okay.
right.
You can't be disrespectful to me and then expect me to still be supportive of your experiences, relationships, pay bills, stuff like that. So there's always going to be rules in our household. But what they're listening to is the opposite of that. They're listening to and hearing, cut your family members off and then be a part of this external community, which people can find. There's all kinds, okay? There's all kinds of people in this world. There are people who are in romantic relationships with inanimate objects. There are people who walk around and they are in relationships where they are, submissive to someone else. There are all kinds of people in this world, but they're saying now be a part of this community and reject all of the traditions and values that your parents gave you. And in large part, that's because those very people who are giving that message out are trying to heal their own familial traumas and maybe wounds or decision making through watching and leading other people who might not have had that same experience. And I think that's harmful and dangerous. And I honestly see so many young people following it. And I think that may be something, again, all we can do is suppose at this point that may be something that's a part of our family. But I also challenge you and me both to say, why don't we reach out? And I'm going to tell you, a part of the reaching out maybe passive. I'm more passive. I do reach out to those family members who have decided to be quiet. But at some point, if you're not giving me that reciprocal exchange, Rita's going to throw deuces up and not talk to you anymore.
Percent. I mean, honestly, I feel like, no matter to me, right? This is, and everybody else, they got to go with what resonates with their own morals and values and their character, right? But to me, if a person, I don't care who it is, mother, father, sister, son, or daughter, right? If they're not willing, to just agree to a common ground, a standard of how to conduct themselves with each other, respect each other, and reach out to each other, just stay in communication with you. That's fine. What I'm doing is fully accepting it. You know what I mean? And
Mm.
I'm not trying to aggressively push, for something that I want.
What does
Like
that mean, fully accepting it? What does that mean?
so fully accepting it is that I don't have control over another person. I got control only on myself and the choices that I personally make. Right. And I don't, for some things, I feel like a lot of people, they make decisions based on some internal factor that's influencing it. Like say, sometimes people are overcompensating because of guilt they have or shame they might have or whatever. But I know
Very powerful emotions, guilt and shame.
for sure. So what I for sure that in comparison to the father that we had, that I've been an exceptional father to my children.
Right.
Now they and I think also is by virtue of being that, like, being a superior, right? Because I'm in an authoritative role as a superior. So I'm definitely a superior because they are a consequence of my actions and choices, and I actually created them. So I made their life. You know what I
Right.
mean? But
Whether
so
they
by
like
virtue, yes, by virtue of being that, I'm not supposed to be their friend. You know what I'm
right.
saying? So I don't look for their approval and acceptance of how I parented them. You know what I
And
mean?
see, that's very different in what they're being taught, right?
Exactly.
Is
Yeah.
that you see, and I think that's a very good point, that there are differences in the roles that we play as parent. I always say the only reason I know you is because and it really if I extended that statement, it would be the only reason we in relationship, not just know you, but we even in relationship is because you were my child. Now, and what that means to me is that there is a meaningful part of what I have to contribute to your development and how I have to contribute to your growth, but that does not require me to be your friend. And I think that that's a very powerful distinction that children may not understand, and that also other influences are saying that's not true. And so I think that that's a very important note, that as parents, we play a very different role. There's a different influence. And from my perspective, I only know you because of that. I might not be choosing these folks on the street to be my friends. When I look at some of their character, I'm like, y'all ain't people I want to hang out with. Y'all sit
But
in the room and
sometimes,
play video games.
sometimes you're lucky enough to where you have an offspring that you connect with, right? You got a deep understanding with, and you got a great relationship with, congenial and stuff. You get lucky to have that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But it's not necessary. You know what I
Right,
mean? I
right.
was thinking that, a lot of people talk about, especially like in the development of a manhood, right? They talk about when a person actually becomes a man, from this your son said in terms of this gentle
Parent.
parenting thing, right? But look, when you go into the military or any sort of a program like that, the very first thing they do in orientation is this basic training. And that basic training is breaking the civilian mentality out of you and then putting it into you a soldier mentality, right? So what I'm saying to you is in it is harsh. And what they're trying to instill in you is a respect for authority and rank and file
Hmm.
and obeying orders and all
Hmm.
this. And there's a consequence for not doing that. And this happens to grown people, when you're going through that stuff, right? This adjustment in mindset.
Right, right.
But those people have pride in their role, pride in their mission, pride in the organization that they're associated with. So to me, then that says that methodology works, right? And that was the old school methodology that we came from, where it was you have to respect your elders, right? And then there's some actual consequences from not. You're gonna get spanked, maybe by the whole community of elders. You feel me? Your neighbors see you do something wrong, they spank you. They go tell your parents when you get home, they gonna spank you, all this stuff.
To the point of spanking, don't you think we have evolved much better past that? Because I will say this from my spanking experiences, and even, in my parenting role, I recognize that it did not really shape the behavior. It
Well,
created
it
this.
did. It shaped behavior. It's just something that, let's just say, nobody likes the bad consequences of things that happen,
Right?
right? Let's say right now, when you drive a vehicle is actually a weapon, right? The vehicle's purpose is to get you from A to B, right?
Okay.
The vehicle itself is also designed to keep you safe, but not necessarily designed to keep the others outside the vehicle safe. right?
Okay.
So what I say to you is, if I operate the vehicle incorrectly, I could cause a lot of damage to others and to myself, right? So I have to take the way I'm operating this vehicle very seriously. I got a very big responsibility in it. But let's just say I go and I drive the vehicle into a pole, and the pole come crashing down onto the car and it hurts me severely. You know, I'm not going to like that happened, right? So no, like put it this way: if I fall down right now on the ground, I could get injured. I could get hurt myself. You know, so by virtue of falling, which is a human experience, everybody's going to fall in their life. You might get hurt in falling, right?
Okay.
And if when I do get hurt in doing anything, any kind of pain or any kind of adverse response or reaction or consequence, no one likes it. You know what I'm saying? But
Okay.
you should think of something, especially the stream of put it this way. You could love riding a motorcycle. You could fall off that motorcycle, break your legs, skin up all your skin. And so some people that would make them quit riding a motorcycle ever again.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Some people they'll think about what did I do wrong? You know, and this time when whatever I did wrong, I'm going to fix that going forward. But I love it so much that I can't quit it. So the pain, basically through the failure or whatever, you learn the most, you know? So getting those spankings helped us. It didn't hurt us. It helped us because we learned and grew in it, even though we did not like it. You
Okay.
know?
So let me ask you this question. So you resonate then in your instructional model
Yeah.
with pain can drive experiences. My challenge
100%.
to you was, can you learn any other way? Because I can tell you this, I didn't necessarily need to get hit, to get spanked, to learn lessons that were valuable to me. Like I think I'm more pain averse and even perhaps more risk adverse. But I think we learn a lot about you when you say you saw the value in those lessons. And I want to also point out that I think in this dynamic, I got far more whippings than you ever.
Oh, yes. All right. So then let's say this, right? You know, I heard this before from somebody. They say an intelligent being, right? An
Are
intelligent
you
being.
calling me dumb?
No, I'm calling all human beings that they got questionable decision making, right?
Okay, okay.
What is this? If you got a lot of spankings and somebody's saying, well, there's something wrong in that, right? Because if you didn't like it as much as you said, then why would you do something that would produce it? Because you weren't getting spanked for no reason. It was like I did something, now I got paid a consequence for it. But a person, intelligent person says, I don't like getting spanked. So whatever causes me to get that, I won't even do it. You know, they actually have a psychological thing. I think they call it like Pavlovian effect or something, where it's like you could have a beast, like a dog or something, right? The dog will learn what to do and what not to do by virtue of pain.
That's called conditioning. And what I will say is the
But
learning
intellect, though, that
it's intellect. I think it's
why not? Because the intellect is making that conditioning work. So it says, like right now, right? You could make it to where, like, see, this desk is way lower than my waist, right? So
okay.
I could get out of this space even if I was totally closed in. But if somebody rang a bell and shocked me when I was making attempts to get off of this desk, my intellect will say, I don't like that shock. So I make this move, this going to shock me. So I ain't going to make that move. You
Okay.
know, I make all kinds of other moves. So this thing is called pain compliance, right? So most people have so
Conditioning.
yes, conditions, but through pain, but you have to have an intellect. You have to have a processor that allows conditioning to work because without the processor, none of it would be
Some
effective.
people just gonna keep it. Or again, that could be their act of resistance, as I said earlier. But I think to your point that there are different instructional models and that you have this pain compliance model. And I'm just making the point that you can use other models like reinforcement based, reward based systems are also other models that people use that could also shape and produce good outcomes and behaviors.
What's the opposite of reward?
Well, there's no real opposite in the direct sense.
Punishment.
Punishment is not an opposite.
punishment and rewards. So like
It's not
that's
the opposite though. It's not necessarily an opposite.
everything in existence has a polar opposite. Everything. There's nothing that exists in this world that don't have an opposite. But the reason why the opposites are important to each other is because all of existence exists on this spectrum somewhere. So we fall somewhere in between it, right? And then it's good to know it, right? Because sometimes, when we start thinking about, the good and the bad, like good and bad is opposite ends of the same spectrum. And some people's orientation is here or there, but we're not perfectly good or perfectly bad. We're on that same spectrum thing, right? So I say that to say the spectrum itself is divine, is God, right? So there has to be good, there has to be bad, you know, but
Okay.
you got to know which one you are relative to where you fall on that spectrum. You know what I mean? So you're saying, well, I prefer the rewards over punishment. So I would say this: using a reward system is dangerous. It's less effective because,
Very perplexed about that.
all right, so let me give you an example of the reward system, right?
Okay.
Because a lot of people like this instant gratification of reward. So let's just say right now, if I'm a child and you put in front of me a plate of asparagus and Brussels sprouts and broccoli, and then you put another plate in front of me full of cookies, cakes, and pies, what will I go for, do you think?
Well, I know you and you the cookie monster and the cake.
I'm talking the 90, so it would take a very special person to look at the asparagus and say, you know what? That's a healthier choice for me. And I'm gonna take that. That's a very special person.
I just want to argue with you for a second because
Yeah.
I think this is a little bit more nuanced than you think. And I want to shape the fact that and I want to push back on some words that you used where you
Right.
said immediate. Because one thing about rewards is in the model that I'm talking about is the behavior has to occur and then it has to be at a certain kind of interval of reward. So the rewards aren't necessarily instantaneous. Also, what is rewarding to a person is it varies based on their social cultural models, right? And their own internal experiences. So to be very, very provocative, it may be rewarding to be punched in the face for some people, right? Or there are people who get very, very gratified by people choking them out, things like that. So it's a little bit more nuanced, I think, than you are saying, but I'm following your logic. And what I think though is the value is we can use different approaches to behavior change. And that when we use those various approaches, we have to recognize that there is a degree of change that can be expected. What I'm going to say to you is that I believe the reward and reinforcement reward model is far more permanent because when you see what happens when you implement those contingencies and are reinforced by those contingencies, it seems like a lot more long term kind of situation versus someone who's just trying to avoid punishment. I'm gonna give you a good example of this. When Jalen was little, or my son, we gave him an option one time for what the punishment was gonna be. The
Yeah.
child could get the spanking, or the child could get the video game removed. And he said, "Spank me."
That's moving the video game was more painful to him, right? So that was more of a so like what I'm trying to say to you is because I think again in the way that we're talking, it's always seems to me like that you think that we're not saying the same thing. Because even what I'm saying is nuanced, right? Because I believe that even if you are a parent who believes in spanking, which you know, I guess incidentally, I never really spanked my kids that much. I spanked Tasia once, and I probably spanked Amir 2 or 3 times. He was a little bit more, uh, you know, hard headed than Tasia was. More stuff. But I'm saying this to say, in the parents' toolbox, they use rewards, they use punch. You use a number of things. So you don't just do. You don't. Your thing is not to say, "Hey, do this good thing or I'm gonna spank you or whatever." No, sometimes you do try to encourage, you try to talk, you
Well,
do a
we
lot,
do.
you do
We
a
did. Grandma was not like that. That was
you're
not our
like that too. Like
plan.
so what I'm trying to tell you is every single human being operates like that. Like she would be telling us like if you do this, if you achieve this thing, which takes time to do, that you'll get this reward, which might be a dinner or it might be something that you wouldn't like. So it was not and no one that exists ever does one thing a only type of way. Like we do a myriad of things. So in this way, you start finding things that actually are effective in work, right? So in this case, you saw in your son's case that he picked like the what he felt was the lesser of the two evils. You know, I really think because that would be things that I get back to life.
Right.
But if I lose this thing, then that'd be too much for me. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? Or
Right.
whatnot. So now you start with either one as an avenue towards pain,
Right.
right? And either way, people may not like it. Like you said, he's held that he thought that that was severe, and that keeps coming up. So that's the same type of thing what you saying about how you felt about being spanked,
Yeah.
right? But either way, ultimately they were effective because there was a harsh consequence of reality that you don't want to experience,
Right.
right? So now the intelligent mind will say, well, and this is what is used systematically to keep people from being able to do shit, right? Because they'll take an example of somebody. They like might see somebody that's coming up with some massive resistance and stuff like that, and they'll do terrible things to them to make an example of them. And every other person that's like them will be like, I don't want to end up like him.
Right. Right.
So they will not do it because they don't want that pain constant. Just like right now, yeah. Because like right now, for what you're saying, if I'm looking at somebody like our neighbor or something could get apprehended or abducted because of their immigration status. But if I run out there and try to prevent it and stop them or whatever, then they could incarcerate me. Now I don't know how long that's going to be.
Right.
How process I'm gonna get, all this stuff. I don't know what could happen from me doing this, right?
So what you're saying is our systems are using the same pain aversion.
They're using the same thing. And so what I'm saying to you is, it's so they're giving you just enough to live, right? Yeah, I could get a house, I could get a family, I could do this, I could go to the store, I can have some entertainment experiences and stuff. But as long as I stay in my box and
Yeah.
mind my own fucking business. But when I start being like, well, that's wrong, and I start speaking out, now they start doing shit, like boycotting you back,
Right.
making it so that it's hard for you to get a living,
Right.
blacklisting you. Now
Right.
you can't get no patience and all that. Now you start thinking like, damn, should I have done that?
Right.
Because
Right.
now my shit is
So it's
fucked up.
effective. So what you're
Yeah.
saying is this pain aversion is effective and it's really having a huge consequence on how we're resisting and how we're kind of being situated in all of our experiences, not just we started this discussion about talking about parenting, but really you're using this as an example of like it's changing how all of what we're experiencing everything. And that's a meaningful thing. But I think before we go into our fun part of the show, I think we should say that people should be able to predict that that's going to happen. And again, you have to resist at the level of resistance that you can resist at. And so those are personal choices, like you said.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
I think that we all have a responsibility in this time period, to make a choice and a decision to resist. Because at the end of the day, I don't think any of us, regardless if you if you ascribe to this kind of us versus them complex, no one is safe. Like I think the principles, the ideas, the philosophies, the ideology that's allowing any of this harmful stuff to happen can be applied to any group of people. And I don't think we need to miss that. So I really do appreciate your reflection.
Totally agree. I think that going back to referencing what grandma said, I mean, the golden rule, and this isn't grandma's words only, but this is what she shared with us was do unto others as you would want them to do to you. So what I'm saying is when I see something being done to somebody else, I just take that person out of it and I put myself there.
Right,
And I
right,
look at like if I was in that person's shoes and there was somebody that was observing this, what would I hope that that person would do for me? And then I had to ask myself, am I brave enough to do that for this person?
it's very
Knowing that it's going to cause me some sort of
discomfort.
consequence, discomfort. Absolutely.
Right.
We all, like you said, we all gonna have that. But then I look at it and I say, yeah, it's worth it because if I was in those shoes, I
Mhm.
would want the person to do it. But let's hit the fun stuff.
Let's hit the fun stuff. But I think that what you said is so important. So I think that if, my challenge for the day as I leave our time in safety in the Rose Garden is to really be able to always situate myself in other people's experience. I don't do that always very well. And so I appreciate that that's something that you do. And it's a really good example. What I do very well, though, is sit with what my choices are. And I make choices that are aligned with my belief set, my ideology, and I make those choices very public, and I make those experiences like people can count on me being a certain kind of way. So like if you my friend, you know what I'm going to do, what I'm not going to do, and when that's ever challenged, you got to know something is either wrong with me or I've really made some big changes. But here's the fun part. So, and this activity is not mine, so I do not get to. None of them really are mine, but some of them like I be making my own little
Yeah, I see that.
I be putting my own little spin on them. But this one is so last time we talked about living having 24 hours to live, and all the people who responded, all you all avoided any kind of basic functional things like getting food, getting anything like this. So it made me think about what are the motivations? And you and I both are going to get to answer this because I got some feedback that I always be putting uncle on. Like, see how your nephews and nieces be riding for you. Ain't nobody riding for me. They riding for you. You don't be putting uncle on the hot spot. So,
I agree. I could take it. Yeah, I'm a big boy. That's hey, you see, that's the thing that distinguishes people is like, I could get into a heated, hard battle because I'm a lion. I can handle it. You know what I mean? Some people can't take that heat.
right, right. Well, you've been doing it beautifully. I mean, all these marriage proposals you've been getting and all that. All right. So here's the task.
All right.
You have to state your personal mission. Like when and in mission statements, it's the things that represent you. And then you have to describe why you came up with the mission you came up with. And I'm going to challenge you to use 3 sentences to come up with this personal experiences, this personal mission. And in the conversation, you must use I am for each of the sentences. All right. So you're going to give 3 sentences.
You can lead by example on it then, so I can understand what you mean.
I'm going to explain it to you because I always like you to go first because I want to like your mind. So you can use 3 sentences to guide your personal mission. These are your foundational founding principles. So I am black, I am tall, I am whatever, and then you have to describe. But these are just basics. I know you're going to say something far more profound, and then you have to describe why you chose those things. And then there's a part 2 to that. All right. So go. You get your 3 sentences. They have to describe your 3 mission, your personal kind of idea, philosophy, your personal mission. They have to describe why you did it. And then I'll go.
I am an extraordinary human being who has a sincere desire to continually evolve and contribute to the growth of other people.
Okay. I am spirit. I am fun. I am flexible. All right. So why did you say what you said?
Well, first of all, I feel like, I'm blessed to be in this position that I'm in right now. And I know that I'm in this position because of the folks that were here before me, you know. So I always want to pay homage to the people that preceded us. And I feel like an obligation to those that are succeeding us. Honestly, I believe my personal mission in life is to build meaningful, purposeful relationships that are actually lasting. So to me right now, I feel like I'm in the process of shedding off the layers of folks that are less meaningful. And, they kind of start showing themselves by their behaviors and actions. So why did you say what you said?
So I think it's interesting because I used this already. I did this activity, and I think I'm very aligned with how you think, but the way I reference it in my own mind is just very kind of elementary. So spirit to me, so spirit to me is all the spiritual influences that have contributed to how I am and who I am, and that it's framed around some things that I can really not consciously reach to or explain, but I try to master every day and make that be a vital part of who I am and how I show up and present.
I like that. You had asked me about the Sinners movie and all that stuff, and I like some of the symbolism that they put in there. But one of the things that I thought was meaningful that they connected with was that our heritage, our ethnic heritage, is connected to spirituality. So I think that we are a bridge to the spirit world and this physical world,
Absolutely.
and that's why like we are a very compassionate people, and I think people who know that they take advantage of it, right? Because there might be some folks again, but the world needs this, right? Because you always be wondering, well, if there's a God, then why do these bad things happen? But it's by design because out of some bad things, sometimes some really incredible things occur.
Right. Right.
So if these things are necessary. So what's next?
So then I also said that I'm fun, and I describe that because I use fun synonymously with positive in in that sense. And so that when you're in my space, in my aura, you're going to get this positive energetic exchange, and I try to vibrate on that level. And then I am flexible because I recognize that as humans we have to be in a change state, and that one of the things that I see as important to me is being able to adapt to change, make change meaningful, and be a part of change. So I wanted that to be how I represented myself. Then the
Right.
part two to that. So what do you think of that first before I say?
Well, I think that's spot on. That's very admirable, no
And
doubt.
it seems like me, like I think that your description is very true to you, and I think this is me. And now the part that was much more difficult for me to do in this activity was, which part would you be fine with not doing every day? Or wait, I think I said that wrong. Is there a part that you would be fine with not embodying every day?
Interesting. Nah, not for me. There's no part of it that I wouldn't be fine with embodying every day. Is
And
there for
I
you?
said the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, many people in the group that I was a part of, they were able to give up parts of themselves, right? And so the challenge then for the people, so everybody didn't get to share, but the majority of the people in the room gave up parts of themselves because I don't think they thought that there was flexibility and choice in that. And I think that I was thinking I didn't get to share openly, but what I learned from that was that, if you give up any parts of yourselves, then really is this a part of your personal mission? And so that's like my challenge to folks is, if these are truly defining characteristics and that you say these are the things that define you, then you shouldn't be able to give them up. And so I think that that's some work that folks need to do. I don't want to give them up. And I love that. And I knew you would. I knew you'd be the A student. Plus, your brain already thinks outside of many boxes, that you would have said that, no, I'm not giving up any of those things. But you have to challenge yourself if you're ever pushed, because I think what we are seeing now is people are giving up parts of themselves to even execute part of these missions. I'm hearing that silently in other spaces where people are like, well, it's my job, so I have to do it. you know a part of how we resist and how we show up could be that we challenge what is a very extremely threatening. Like, I am not minimizing that we are living in a very threatening, fear inducing situation. But if masses of people stood up and said that I reject these ideals and know I have personal autonomy and freedom, it would not give the power to these very minority group. Like, if you look at the percentage of people who are asking folks to do these things, it's a very small. It's not hundreds of thousands of people saying kidnap people off the street.
Right, right,
Maybe
right.
100 people saying kidnap people off the street, or 50, who knows? But thousands of people are doing it now. And that's because they have given up a part of themselves. And so that's my challenge to people is like, you do not have to give up part of yourselves. And the threat of death is always real, like, to all of us. We are not running away from it. Sadly, one of my husband's friends just passed away on vacation recently,
Wow.
from like very known circumstances and unusual circumstances. And I think this young man was, if he was 50, he was a young 50. So we ain't running from the end.
Well, nobody can escape that
Right.
outcome, that ultimate conclusion. But
Right. So
this is really the challenge too, sister, is that I honestly believe that looking at the hard parts of ourselves, the shadow parts of ourselves is actually difficult as well. I appreciate all the wonderful things you say about me. I hope you appreciate the same that I do with you. But I would challenge people to look at themselves like areas, to be honest, like an honest reflection, honest inventory of themselves, because we all have shortcomings. We all do, right? And to be honest about those shortcomings, I think once you realize them, like some real healing can happen because you can connect to each other on the levels of their own humanity. You know what I mean?
right, right,
See the power of it, because without doing this stuff, it's surface. You know how like some people want to say, I want to apologize. I just want to say sorry, right? But they don't really, it's so surface because they're saying the words, but you don't really feel the meaning, behind it. Whereas somebody who's really taking some time to look into like, well, these are my shortcomings and I can describe them to you, you know, this is where I fell short. This is how I know you must have felt in these situations. And if that's accurate, if that's truthful and that's spot on, I think it has a property of like, really, really manifesting what this thing that's described in the word of love, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm with you.
Well, I hope that everybody appreciates how vulnerable you've been and I've been today, and that they'll come back and join us next week in the Rose Garden. We are here every Thursday at 2 p.m. Even though today we were a little bit late because of our technical issues, but we appreciate your patience and you all hanging in with us. Brother, any last words before we let folks go?
I thought you was working on that promotion for the folks that joined us last week. But I still wanted to give them a shout out. I really enjoyed their guest appearance. In a Katai and Anissa Doors and all that stuff. When we talked with them, so I wanted to you know just call out to August 9th. That Wiggle Total event. For people to pour out to it. We was going to definitely support it as well. Yes,
Absolutely, absolutely. I
yes,
cannot wait.
yes. And very lifted and encouraged. I want to just radiate love in all directions and definitely target and focus at you and hope you have an enjoyable rest of the day.
You do too. Bye for now, brother.
You too.